Especially at the level of making indie comics, you're most likely not gonna make a lot of money. Sometimes you can just talk to someone for 5 minutes and you kind of get a sense if you're gonna vibe or not. The sheer dopamine hit of seeing the story illustrated was immediately addictive. There are so many expenses that come just from the process of trying to make money. This to me is the most incredible part of working. A piece of advice that I see floating around pretty commonly, which is
So, welcome to the Storyboard Room, an animation industry podcast where we share knowledge and experience to help you get in. I'm Eric Bravo, and for today's episode, we're diving into an animation-adjacent world, comic books, and specifically how to publish your first indie comic. I'm joined by our very special guest, Alan Wu. Alan is a writer who works across multiple mediums, including comics, screenplays, and novels. And he's also the founder of Tortoise and the Hare Comics, where he publishes his own titles like Shentu and Princess Royale. Alan, thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat about all this. It's been I kind of fell into the rabbit hole of reading comic books a couple years ago, and it I feel like the last 2 or 3 years have kind of flown by. At the very beginning, I kind of dove in without knowing anything about the process at all, and now I still mostly feel like I don't know anything, but I guess I've picked up a couple of things here and there over the years. So
Yeah.
definitely happy to share a little bit of what I've learned and my journey, and hopefully it can just be of use to other people as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I do want to get started in the beginning and then work our way into the comic side, because I think your path is really interesting and really helpful for anyone watching who wants to create their own comic book. And to kick things off, um, how did you get into writing in the first place?
Yeah, so I've been doing creative writing for basically my whole life. I think the where I got the bulk of my initial experience is I I used to do these online like text-based role-playing websites when I was a teenager. I feel like a lot of people got started with either with something like that, whether it's fan fiction or role-playing or something like that. But for me, my gateway to writing was I just spent my teenage years writing thousands of words of uh this text-based role play, which is kind of like collaborative fan fiction now that I think about it. But there would be these sites where you could create characters in the worlds of whatever popular media there was, like Naruto, Pokemon, Harry Potter, whatever. People would just make their own characters and then interact with each other. And so that was how I got into writing to begin with. And I knew pretty early on that that was more or less what I wanted to do with my life in one shape or another. So I spent a lot of time focusing on prose at first, writing novels. I used to do those National Novel Writing Month challenges and things like that to get some early experience. Studied English literature and creative writing at NYU, and after I graduated, I discovered screenwriting, and I spent a few years kind of learning just finding my footing in the world of screenwriting and film and TV. And then after that, it was kind of another jump to comics as well. Um, I feel like in the various mediums that I'm kind of part of the community of, whether it's prose or comics or movies, there's many people who are in love with one particular medium. They say, like writing books or making movies is their passion. And for me, I feel like it's I don't necessarily have a diminished passion for those things, but I enjoy. I think what I enjoy most is the writing itself and exploring how different stories can be told across different mediums.
Like you mentioned, in the past couple years, it feels like you really leaned into comics, and not just as a writer, but as a creator, building your own publishing lane with Tortoise and the Hare. What made you shift your focus towards comic books instead of screenwriting or novels?
So it was something that I started exploring just on a complete whim. which was actually how I got into screenwriting as well. I feel like a lot of the things that have taken over my life in the last decade, I didn't start out going all into them, but I thought, here's something that might be fun, and I would start exploring it. And I just got more and more sucked in. With comics, I think that my experience uh, in trying to break into screenwriting gave me a lot of motivation for this because as a screenwriter, uh, who's trying to break in, you're very far removed from the actual end process of what you're trying to do, right? Because you write your screenplays and you're mostly trying to get read or get a rep or things like that, and the whole being produced it just feels very far down the line. So after a few years of writing my scripts and just kind of grinding away, um, once I started just investigating the world of comics, I realized that there's it's much more feasible to just start making your own thing. And this is the advice that's given for screenwriters as well, I think. Like you're encouraged to make your own shorts, your own short films, things like that, even if it's like a sketch or whatever that you can put online, right?
Mhm.
And I think making comics is it is a slightly different medium, but it's another way where if you're trying to break into the entertainment industry, you just kind of take control of your own destiny and you start getting your story produced. So after I had just experimented with commissioning a few comic pages of an animated screenplay I'd wrote, I felt that the immediate just the sheer dopamine hit of seeing the story illustrated
Yeah.
was, kind of immediately addictive to me. So I just kept going with it, and even then, it's not something I immediately committed to, because at the beginning, my mindset was still, "Well, I'm fully focused on screenwriting, but maybe comics is like a thing I can do on the side, right?" So at first I thought, okay, I'll just make one issue of a comic and for fun. And then I thought, well, I actually need to make two issues to fully adapt the pilot that I had written, so I should commit at least that far actually. And it was like I just kept baiting myself forward a little by little, and then now all of a sudden it's like I flash forward and I have my own little imprint. I'm juggling way too many series right now, actually, and I just am like completely in for the long haul at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, and I feel like that's a huge leap, from, how you got started into writing and diving deep into comic books. Um, and I wanted to talk about your first book, Shentu. How did you get the idea of the story, and what made you believe in it enough to do the two-part series?
Yeah, so this is the first issue of my first series, Shentu. It's about an immortal rabbit woman in ancient China, and the premise is that she accidentally consumes an elixir of immortality, which is a blessing in a way, but also a curse in that she realizes she's always going to be outliving her loved ones. And so that kind of sets the stage for her ongoing story where she's having these adventures in ancient China and seeing the other characters go through the various stages of their lives and knowing that she's always going to have to outlive them in the end. So when I go back to the inspiration for this story, it is something that I developed as an animated TV pilot initially before I decided to adapt into a comic. But when I was writing it as a pilot, I was going off of a piece of advice that I see floating around pretty commonly, which is write the TV show that you most want to see. And in this case, I took that advice very literally, and I think in a kind of crude manner. In that I was thinking of like my favorite elements of shows and things, and I kind of almost just cobbled them together in a way because, I'm Chinese, so I wanted to use that heritage in some way. I like rabbits, so I wanted that to be a part of. You can see I have this buff bunny behind me. But yeah, and this was before my comics era, but I wanted to get that comic book vibe in there a little bit as well. So even though I wasn't thinking of making comics, I wanted it to make it a little bit comic booky, which was helpful when I ended up adapting it into a comic. But that is to say, Shentu, she's obviously not a traditional superhero, but she's kind of that larger than life mythological figure. So I was kind of pulling from some of those tropes as well. And a lot of the story, it also comes directly from Chinese mythology. There is the story of Tang'e, the moon goddess, which is pretty well known. I took that as kind of the seed of this concept, and I spun it off into my own direction pretty much immediately. But in terms of the inspiration of the story, part of it does come from Chinese mythology.
Cool. And was there a moment where you knew, like, okay, I'm committing to this?
Like I said, when saw the first comic book pages,
Mhm.
it it was so cathartic after again after years of writing PDFs and struggling to get people to see them. So I think the moment, or maybe the moment in two parts is that one, when I saw the artwork of Shentu, Shentu being illustrated for the first time, that was very magical to me. And also, I realized that when I started telling people that, hey, I'm making a comic book, and when I got to the point where I could hand them the issues of the comic, I could tell that there's just a very big difference in how people react to you. I think when you have a completed uh, work that you can give them rather than a screenplay, which is ultimately just a blueprint for the actual uh, end product, right? And so it was just a very validating, and I think that was a big part of what made me feel like I wanted to keep going with it.
Yeah. That's awesome. And obviously with comic books, the writing is huge, but the art is the other half of storytelling. How did you go about finding the artist from Shentu and what was the vetting process like?
Now that I've been in, comic book circles for a little while, that part of the process has gotten easier because now I'm always, keeping an eye on artists to work with, whether it's immediately or in the future, right? So once I've kind of developed some of those relationships, it's easier to just reach out to people and figure out a collaboration. But at the beginning, I really knew nobody. I didn't know how the process worked at all. And fortunately, I think it's not too hard to get started with because there's generally always a lot of artists, comic book artists, looking for work if you know where to find them. Reddit is a pretty good hub for this sort of thing. And also, there's a lot of artists just on social media as well, where they'll be posting that they're looking for work, and they usually have their portfolio and sometimes their page rates as well. Social media is a little bit tougher these days because everything is more fractured. But on Reddit, there's certain subreddits. Like one of the main ones is called Comic Book Collabs, and if you go there and it doesn't have to be Reddit, there's other hubs as well, where it just people will literally post that they're looking for work, so you can kind of look through their portfolios and start talking to them that way.
And when you do collaborate and find an artist, is what makes a great writer artist relationship.
I think there's so many components to it, because there like you want to mesh well creatively, but also as people as well, and that part of it is probably more important. I've been doing this for 2 or 3 years at this point, which is really not that long. But because one of the projects I did was an anthology comic, I was able to work with a lot of artists in a pretty short span of time. And that was actually part of the reason why I wanted to do an anthology, just to kind of build up a lot of experience working with different artist styles and also artist personalities. And that did give me some insight into this question of what makes for a good collaboration between a writer and an artist rather. And I think you have to be comfortable working with each other. Some it's something you can get a feel for just within not even I think if you interact with them just a little bit, and this isn't specific to being a writer or an artist, but sometimes you can just talk to someone for 5 minutes and you kind of get a sense if you're gonna vibe or not, right? And I think that's very important to the process because there are there's gonna be cases where they might be very skilled and professional, but if you feel like um your personalities just aren't if the interactions are a little bit awkward or frosty for whatever reason, um, sometimes that can be more impactful than if there's more concrete issues in the collaboration because especially at the level of making indie comics, you're you're most likely not gonna make a lot of money. You're most likely gonna be fighting to break even, and if that's the case, I think you have to be enjoying yourself. And I mean, there of course, you wanna make a good comic, you wanna build experience, you wanna have something that you can be proud of and show people, but I think you nee you need be it's so expensive and difficult to make stuff at this level that if you're not happy with the process, it's just gonna be so much of an more of an uphill battle. And so I think when it comes to uh, finding an artist that you want to work with, just making sure your personalities mesh well is a hugely important factor.
I want to get a little nerdy on the process of making a comic book because a lot of people watching are probably wondering how this works on the page. When you're creating a comic, what usually comes first, the writing or the artist's visual approach?
So this is again something that can be hugely variable depending on the specific writer and the specific artist. And of course, there are amazing people who complete, they write and draw their own comics, and that's a whole different ball game. But when it comes to there being a writer and an artist, it it kind of just depends on what works best for the both of you together in that specific collaboration. Something interesting about comic book scripts that I learned coming from the world of screenwriting is that comic book scripts are much less there's much less of a standard format for comic book scripts compared to screenplays. So it's a little bit more of a wild west of, like, how you even format the page to begin with, so it can be just a lot more chaotic, and then there's just a lot more room for variation, I guess, and so when it comes to both the writer and the artist, there can be a big range of just how what they prefer in terms of some writers, they wanna give, like, a huge amount of detail and write, like, very complicated panel descriptions and be very specific, and some artists, will prefer if you can give them as much detail as possible, and on the other hand, there's, both writers and artists who prefer it when the script is a little bit more loose and the artist has more freedom, uh, to, um to kind of, take some liberties with the art and the page layout and all that. But I think in indie comics, when there's a when there's a writer and an artist working together, it's usually not always, but usually the writer who brings the idea. The writer is also usually the one who's hiring the artist to draw the comic book. So I would say in that case, it starts with the writer's story and the process begins from there.
So after you've written your scripts, you find an artist and you have 22 pages of comic books ready. How do you go about publishing?
Like, I wanna say this is, like, the big question, but it's more like there's, like, like, a long series of big questions
Mm.
or hurdles to getting your comic book out into the world, and this is just one of them. But there's a few different options, and I think the first fork in the road of your options is whether or not, uh you want to make money or rather what your plan for funding the project is because if you're very well off then you can or maybe not you don't even have to be super rich if you're making like a small scale project you don't necessarily need to monetize it, right? And if that's the case, then putting it out there in the world can be as simple as just posting it online, right? Or, providing a link where people can download it or read it online as a webcomic. The floor for putting your comic out there is relatively low. It just depends on how much reach you want to have with the comic and whether or not you want to make some money, which is the hard part, I suppose. So in terms of publishing options, that's not just throwing it out there for free. You can crowdfund it on a platform like Kickstarter or GoFundMe, or there's a couple others, some even comic specific platforms, but Kickstarter is the most common one. So I think the standard approach for something like this is you make the comic book. Definitely ideal to make as much of the comic beforehand before crowdfunding. Some people try to crowdfund when they have no art to show, and that just it's much more of an uphill battle. Not only because it's harder to get people interested when you have less to show them, but also because you open yourself up to disaster if you crowdfund and then there's some issues with actually getting the comic made like if there are delays or the artist drops out, then it just is kind of a big hassle if you've already collected money from people, right? um but yeah, crowdfunding is just it's kind of, I feel like it's the default option for releasing indie comics, and then you can also submit to publishers, which is it's one of those things where, like in screenwriting or I guess in any in media, the hardest part is getting your foot in the door, and it's one of those paradoxes where it's really hard to get published if you haven't been published before, essentially. Um, so getting picked up by a publisher, if you've never made a book before, is very difficult, and that's why it's generally recommended that for your first project or for your first few projects, you just find a way to self-publish, and then after that, it might make more sense to start putting out some feelers to small publishers. But I do think that it's not a requirement necessarily because in the landscape of the comic book industry, there are some smaller publishers that are willing to take a chance on first time creators. So y- it's possible to find a publisher, and you can there's various ways of just looking, looking to find publishers. It can be hard to know of them if they're not huge names. I think that the easiest way is to look at other indie comics, which you should be doing anyway if you want to be part of the scene and you want to see what other creators are up to. But one of the many advantages of that is that you can see where these other comics are being published, and you can try and reach out to publishers of those.
Cool. And are there any like hidden costs that people don't expect when making an indie comic?
There are so many. Like I don't even know where to get started. W- That what's funny about this is there are so many expenses that come just from the process of trying to make money. Like there's so much cost from making the comic itself. That's one thing. And then you have to spend a huge amount of money if you want to try and make money. Like for example, um, if you have if you want to have an online store, on Shopify or whatever, there's like all of those platforms. They either have like a monthly like fee to keep the store up, or they'll take a cut of your sales, or sometimes both as well. So and those can be pretty expensive. Like I think that the cheapest plan that Shopify offers, for instance, like the bare bones one is maybe like $10 or $15 per month. And then like the basic one is around $40. And I was using that one for a while, but it was basically impossible for me to, break even on just the fee of hosting the store at when when I was at a very like, when I was just starting out, because when I launch an issue, then I can get some sales, but I'm not making sales in the random off months, right? So that's one instance in which there's some costs. And other than that, if you want to sell comics, like if you want a table at a convention, for instance, it'll usually cost, like, let's say, probably at least $100 usually, to get a table spot at a convention, and it definitely scales up from there. Like a lot of the mid-sized ones, table fee will be maybe $300 or $400 for a weekend. So you need to. It's like you would need to make $400 at the convention just to break even on the fee of being there, and then after that, like let's say you sell, I don't know, uh 20 issues of your comic over the weekend. Um, you immediately need to subtract, the taxes, the sales tax, from that you're collecting. There's also the cost of printing the comic, right? And if you're the writer who paid an artist to draw the comic, that's like a huge cost to consider as well before you get anywhere close to breaking even. So those are some of the like the side costs of making the comic. But even when you're looking at just the comic itself, I'd say some of the less obvious costs are, in addition to the art pages. Sometimes you want to design yeah some like the interior cover page, for instance, like what I have here, for instance, like the credits page, essentially. If you want to make that look nice, you would hire a graphic designer for that. So that that costs a bit more. The logo for the cover is something that you can commission separately, and there are just a lot of small things that add up. Like here, on a more recent issue, I have my Princess Royale series. This has like my tortoise and hare logo. That's something that I commissioned separately as well, and that was maybe uh like $200, I think. And but now that I have it, I can just use that on everything forever. So that was kind of a one time cost, but yeah, there's just a lot of things that you'll this kind of an onslaught of costs.
Yeah, it sounds so crazy, but try to make money, you got to spend money, but you also just want to like break even and share your product with the world. But I did have a question regarding like printing. Uh, for your comic books, do you print runs or do you print on demand? And I guess what's the benefit of either?
So I guess what I do I would is what you would call printing runs. In that I'll print a batch of, like, let's say, you know, 300 copies of this issue, and then I take some with me when I go to table at a convention, or if I'm doing like a Kickstarter campaign, or if I just sell some through my online store, then I ship those out as needed. I would say the benefit of that is that, well, when you print with bulk, it's just much cheaper per copy than printing on demand, I believe. And the the downside is that you can end up or it's more initial, like, you pay more upfront because 'cause you're getting, like, the batch of issues all at once, and, if you're not careful, you can get stuck with a bunch of issues that you don't want. I think a very common mistake, which, I also made, is that it's easy to print too many copies of your first, comic. So for issue 1 of Shentu, I just like, I think I printed 1,000 initially, and I have so many left over still. And then after that, I realized, okay, I can, like, print way less of each issue, and then just if it comes to it, I'll order more, right?
Mhm.
Um, but, if you're printing on demand, on the other hand, you don't have to worry about, printing too much, and you also don't have to have boxes sitting around your house. Um, but it does, cost more per issue.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if someone is watching right now and has a comic book idea, what's the first step you think they should take to actually turn it into a real finished issue?
First of all, plan it out as concretely as possible. There are some writers who they'll start looking for an artist when they mostly just have, like, the lore and the world building and, the broad concepts of the idea, and I get that because that's the phase when you're most excited about the story, and that's when you're thinking, like, "Yeah, I gotta start making this into a reality," right? But if the idea is not fully formed and you're already at the stage where you're working with an artist, then it's just easier for, like, you might realize you have some issues with, like, the plot, and it's harder to correct course when you're already in the middle of making the comic, right? So I think, the first step is just to, uh just, like, ideally have the script for the first issue at least before you find an artist, and, after that, I would say, it's important. I would recommend, being able to pay an artist. There are a lot of, writers who they'll, like, show up and say, "Hey, I need someone to draw my, 22-page comic, and I can't pay you immediately, but, we'll co-own it, and we'll split the profits, 50/50." And the issue with that is that more likely than not, there will be no profits. So because of that, it just is, like, very prudent to pay, artists upfront as much as possible. And that really, uh, sets you up for success right from the beginning, I think, because honestly, um, you probably can find artists who are willing to, try to draw your comic for free or maybe for, like, a suspiciously low, page rate sometimes. But if you're doing something like that, you're also gambling with the quality of your comic. If you can make sure that you can pay an artist, a good rate, then that also helps you, hire a professional who has some experience making comics, and, it just really sets you up for success in being able to get across the finish line of making a comic.
And just had some fun questions for you. Guess what's your favorite comic book or graphic novel of all time?
I'm a relatively modern comic book reader in the sense that a lot of people in the comic book community, they've been, reading and buying comics for, since they were kids and for their entire lives. For me, I've always been a fan of superheroes, but I grew up reading a lot more, manga than Western comics. So it was only, about 4 years ago that I started doing a deep dive into the world of Western comics. And one of the series that helped get me into the comic book store, was this mini series from DC called, Spirit World. It is written by Alyssa Wong and drawn by Hai Ning, and it's this really cool 6-issue story about, Cassandra Cain, who's the Asian Batgirl. She goes on an adventure with these other characters into the spirit world, or the Chinese afterlife as it exists in the DC universe, and is just a really cool blend of Western comics and my favorite character, Cassandra Cain, and some Eastern Asian mythology and spirituality. So to me, that was it's just one of my favorite comics, and it was the reason why I started going to the stores. Fun fact about that: Hai Ning is also the artist who drew the cover of the Shentu series. I reached out to her after reading Spirit World and asked if she wanted to collaborate with me, and she blessed me with some amazing covers. And after that, I've gone to work with her on some other comic projects as well. So, in that sense, just reading Spirit World and finding out about Hiding and trying to reach out to her was like what got me started as a comic creator.
That's so amazing and inspirational because it's just a full circle moment of like a comic book inspiring you and then having that artist actually work on your project too.
Yeah, and I just want to mention this to me is the most incredible part of working in comics, just how accessible the like your absolute heroes can be. Just to compare with film and TV again, I think it's a very different world in the sense that in in film and TV, for instance, if you want to get an actor who you've like remotely heard of, to be in your short film, that's like probably not going to happen, right? Like they're way too busy. It's going to cost way too much. Um, but the scale of everything in comics is, like, both just, like, cheaper and, like, more, like, down to earth in some ways. So, yeah, Hai Ning is one of my absolute favorite, comic book artists, and I was already able to work with her even when I was basically a complete nobody. So, I just think it's really cool that in this is an industry in which, you can, just work with people you really respect and admire and, like, pretty feasibly.
I'm just curious, how did you end up reaching out to her?
I think I reached out, on, her website, had her email. A lot of artists have their contact information available, one way or another, because this is an industry of freelancers. Sometimes people are busy or in demand, but generally, people are always trying to line up the next gig. So artists and writers, they usually make themselves available to be reached out to, if because they want to get gigs as well. And for Haining specifically, a little funny story about that is that when I was reaching out to artists for the potential Shentu cover, I put together a list of maybe 4 or 5 names that I had found who I thought might be a good fit. Hai Ning was the one I added at the very end, and I considered her like, when you're applying to college and you have like the what is it called? Like the reach
Yeah.
schools
Mhm.
where like, that's like the dream, right? So for me, Hai Ning was the one where I was like, I'm just gonna send the email, like she's probably not gonna get back to me. But she was actually like out of that batch of outreach, she was the only person who replied to me. And it's just kind of funny how that worked out.
Yeah, that's amazing. What's a project you do if money didn't matter?
I have a partial answer to this, I guess, where I'm actually right now making. I have an ongoing manga series called My Internet Friends. I don't know if you've seen any of this, Eric, but it's a monthly manga series that I have been posting online.
Mhm.
It's like a kind of sci-fi horror series about people, friends exploring the internet, like the ruins of the internet, and fighting mutated versions of memes. And this is kind of a special project in my slate because it's one that I'm releasing like completely without trying to monetize it in any way. So to me, it kind of satisfies this question because it's kind of being made without like any like monetary considerations, and it's kind of expensive to sustain. But for me, like this is my project right now, where I'm completely making it for the love of the game, essentially. Um, but I'm trying to think of something else too, like what if I could do something else even. I mean, I guess one thing I can say is that, Cassandra Cain Batgirl is my favorite DC character, so if I ever had an opportunity to write for her, that would certainly be a dream of mine.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And yeah, I did check it out on your website too. I think it's such a unique storyline, and I feel like the way you're going about this being your passion project is really awesome to hear. And just curious, what's next for you, and what are you building towards for this year?
This year, I have started to make some inroads with some comic book publishers. I actually got my first pitch accepted by a publisher, Oni Press, pretty recently, and I think it will be announced by the time this interview comes out. But I have a short coming out in one of their sci-fi horror anthologies called Cruel Universe. It's an 8-page short comic coming out in issue 9, I believe, which should be coming out in April. And so that'll be kind of my debut in the direct market, as opposed to just the comics that I've self-published. But that'll be a pretty big step forward for me in terms of just breaking into the comics industry. And I'm hoping to just build on the momentum if possible and get some more pitches picked up by other publishers if possible. And I already have a couple things that are like in early stages of maybe working out sometime later this year. So hopefully I'll be able to say more about that eventually.
How did something like that materialize?
So this is something that's pretty similar to once again to like film and TV or just like other media where you need to connect with execs or people who are in position to accept your pitches because you can you can do cold pitches to publishers, and I think that is successful sometimes, but it's an uphill battle. So for me, I think it's important to connect with other people in the industry, like as humans first and foremost, like not trying to network to like try and get opportunities or uh, specifically, but I spent a lot of like the last couple years just doing what I can to meet people, not just editors at publishers, but going to conventions, reaching out to people online, whether they're writers or artists or just other people in the industry, and just trying to just make some friends, you know. And one instance of that happened to work out where I connected with an editor at Oni Press, and we just kind of bonded over some mutual interests, including Chinese like uh, culture and martial arts and some stuff like that. We talked about for a while, and that ultimately led to being able to pitch some stuff to Oni Press.
I think networking is very important in all industries, but especially in comics and animation and entertainment in general. Alan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this knowledge. I'm sure a lot of people are going to benefit. But before we wrap, where can people find you?
I have a link tree that has very convenient links to all my various social media. Trying to phase out X since it's been having some issues in recent years. So right now, I mostly use Instagram, where my tag is Wow Ausla. Uh, Hopefully, that will be in the description because it's kind of hard to spell. And I also am on Blue Sky, which I feel like a lot of people have flocked to recently. So those are the two main social medias for me.
Yeah, I'll definitely put it on the YouTube video. But for our audio listeners, do you want to go ahead and spell your Instagram?
Yeah, yeah. Instagram is Wow Ausla, WOWOWSLA, And then my blue sky is Alan York Wu, um, ALLENYORKWU, and then just the default handle. So it's BSKY dot social.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think you already mentioned it, but I just want to cover my bases. Any upcoming projects or recent work that you'd like to share with anyone?
I would say my internet friends is probably the easiest thing for people to check out if they want to get a sense for my work because again, that's the one that's just it's both available online for free and it's updated pretty regularly. And so I always encourage people to check that out if they like manga or comics or weird internet memes. But one other thing I wanted to say, especially because it seems like the audience for this might be people more in the world of animation and screenwriting is that I really encourage people to if you have any interest in trying to make a comic, I really encourage you to give it a shot because um, it is not that big of a leap from animation, film, and TV, and it can be very very fulfilling. And it's such a wonderfully collaborative medium too. You get to work with amazing uh, whether you're an artist or a writer, you get to work with like other amazing creatives, and it just makes the whole process a lot more fun and fulfilling to be working closely with people to and the just the turnaround time is faster too, because like animation pipelines, like who knows how long those can take. But with comics, like it doesn't take that long to just start making something really cool. And it's given me a lot of life in the last couple of years as a creative.
That's really awesome to hear, and you definitely inspired me to see and pursue comic books. But yeah, thank you again, Alan, for coming on, and thank you everyone for listening. If you're listening on this on a podcast app, go ahead and rate this 5 stars and subscribe. It really helps us continue making content like this. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Until next time, have a great day.